Okay, welcome everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I think we'll probably have a few people joining us still, but we want to respect your time. So good morning to those of you joining us from across the Pacific region, and good afternoon to those of you joining us from the mainland U.S. and Hawaii. Thanks so much for being with us for today's REL Pacific webinar, Contextualizing Professional Learning for Improved Teacher Effectiveness. My name is Kirsten Miller. I'm a communications manager at REL Pacific, and I'll be your facilitator today. I am joined by my colleague Judy Conley, who will be our technical facilitator today. So if you have any issues with your audio, or if you have any questions about Adobe Connect's functionality, please feel free to send Judy a note in the chat box to your right, and we'll do our best to resolve those. We do also have all of your phones muted. Sometimes people will sneak through and the technology doesn't quite work right, so we're going to ask you to go ahead and mute your phones or microphones on your end as well to avoid any echoes. As I've also learned to say at webinars, technology doesn't always cooperate with us the way we want it to. So in the unlikely event that you do get completely disconnected, please just dial back in using the instructions that I sent to you via email earlier, and we should be able to get you back up and running. So we don't anticipate that, but we do like to expect the unexpected when we're relying on the internet to present this information to you. We are recording today's webinar for future reference and for you to share with your colleagues, or if you have a conflict that requires you to jump offline early today. And you can use that chat box to your right also to ask questions or to share comments throughout the webinar. We absolutely encourage you to do so. We did receive some comments during the registration process and some questions during that registration process that we'll get to at the end of the webinar today. But please do share any thoughts that you'd like to in that chat box. We'd like this to be as interactive an experience as possible. We're going to try to hold those questions for breaks in the presentation, but we will do our best to get to all of them during our time together today. And we're also happy to take follow-up questions and continue the conversation later over email. So we're also thrilled to be joined today by our presenter, Dr. Alix Gallagher, who is the Associate Director for the Center for Education Policy at SRI International. I'll introduce Dr. Gallagher in more detail before I hand the presentation over to her, but first we'd like to know a little bit more about you. So I'm going to ask Judy to pull up a quick poll to get a sense of who we have joining us today. So you'll see we're asking you to choose the role that corresponds most closely to what you do, and there's an other box where you can fill in additional detail if you choose the other option. Just going to give that a moment to come up. And we do this because we like to know at the start of the webinar sort of the composition of our audience so that we can adjust our content as appropriate and as available as we can throughout the presentation. So it looks like we have some LEA or SEA staff. We have some researchers and some university faculty. So I think we can pull that down and get back to our presentation. Bear with me for just a second as we get this back up and running. So next, I'd like to tell you a little bit about REL Pacific and the work that we're engaged in, and specifically give you a little bit of grounding in some of the work that we're doing in the area of teacher professional learning. It looks like my slides are advancing ahead of how I'd like them to. I hope that's not one of those technical glitches. So let's see. It does look like we're having an issue with my slides advancing. So I'm just going to continue talking here while hopefully Judy can.
Kirsten, so let's stop here. I think what happened is when we switched from the poll, it makes the slides advance. So I'm going to stop sharing here.
Bear with us for just a moment, everyone, until we get that pulled back up.
And we're going to try another PowerPoint. And maybe, Kirsten, you can start from.
Sure, I'm forwarding it now. So let's see here. So let's see. Hopefully this will stay where we want it to while I tell you a little bit about REL Pacific. Again, I wanted to give you a little bit of grounding. Thank you, Judy, for helping get us back on track on that. Again, I'd like to give you a little bit of grounding in some of the area that some of the work that we're doing in the area of teacher professional learning, and a little bit more information about the work that we do at REL Pacific in general. So REL Pacific at McCrell International is one of 10 regional educational laboratories funded by the Institute of Education Sciences, or IES, at the U.S. Department of Education. Our current contract cycle runs from 2017 to just the very beginning of 2022, and we serve 7 state and nation-level jurisdictions. Those are American Samoa, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, which includes Chuuk, Koshrai, Pohnpei, and Yap, and then also Guam, the State of Hawaii, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the Republic of Palau. So as you can see from the map that I'm pulling up here, our region is geographically very vast. It spans an area that's larger than that of the entire continental United States, and it's also linguistically and culturally very diverse, which we'll touch on a little bit more in just a few minutes. Our work focuses on 4 priority areas: college and career readiness and success, early childhood education and school readiness, teacher professional learning, which is what we'll be talking about today, and issues in Pacific cultural education, which really kind of undergirds all of the work that we do. Before I tell you a bit about REL Pacific's current work in teacher professional learning, I want to stress that for those of you who are joining us from outside the Pacific region, this information is really applicable to a wide variety of contexts. And as I mentioned, we do work within a geographically, linguistically, and culturally diverse region, as many of you do also. So you're likely to see connections to your own unique context and to your own work, whether you want to learn more about pre-service or in-service professional learning, or if you're just more generally interested in the characteristics of high-quality professional learning for teachers. So our work is structured around researcher-practitioner alliances and partnerships. And we initially began our work around teacher professional learning in the Republic of Palau under the last REL contract cycle. During this current contract cycle, we currently have 2 professional learning partnerships in place: the FSM Partnership for the Improvement of Teaching and the Palau Partnership for the Improvement of Teaching. So these partnerships focus on developing a clear model of effective instruction, improved professional learning opportunities for in-service teachers, improved teacher preparation, and developing an aligned and credible system of teacher evaluation from pre-service through in-service. So specifically, the FSM Partnership for the Improvement of Teaching is focused on developing a clear model of effective instruction and improved professional learning opportunities for in-service teachers, and also on developing pre-service teacher preparation that's really better aligned for developing new teachers with the content knowledge, attitude, and skills that are required to be effective teachers in the FSM. And that is specific to the context and to the jurisdiction. We do focus, as you saw in that priority area, on issues in Pacific education specifically. So what an effective teacher might look like in the FSM might differ slightly from what an effective teacher looks like in Palau because of those geographic and cultural differences. The Palau Partnership for the Improvement of Teaching is focused on improving instruction through advanced teacher preparation and professional development, and their goals include developing an aligned, credible system of teacher evaluation that helps teachers improve and that connects to the preparation of pre-service teachers at Palau Community College. So we have 2 parts to our agenda today. Part 1 is an overview of the current professional development in the Pacific region, and I'll be giving you some context around teacher professional development and certification in the region. The second part of the agenda is where Dr. Alix Gallagher will present on the characteristics of high-quality professional learning, which, as you can see, includes alignment with school goals, state and district standards and assessments, and other professional learning activities. It includes a focus on core content and the modeling of teaching strategies for the content, the inclusion of opportunities for the learning of new strategies, and also opportunities to collaborate and for embedded follow-up and continuous feedback. Okay, so what does teacher preparation and professional development and learning look like in the Pacific region? So first, many teachers in the territories and freely associated states graduate from local community colleges with associate degrees. But in recent years, as we've all moved toward the notion of teachers being highly qualified as described initially in NCLB, there's been some movement toward having all teachers in the region earn bachelor's degrees, and in some jurisdictions that can be a bit more challenging than in others. As I mentioned before, the Pacific region is really unique in a number of ways, and one of the ways in which it's unique is that many areas are quite geographically isolated. So access to on-site four-year programs it can be a challenge. In the Federated States of Micronesia, for example, there are no bachelor degree programs for secondary education. And while there is a rise in online and cohort programs through colleges and universities, such as the University of Hawaii at Manoa, San Diego State University, and the University of Guam, among others, that can sometimes also be challenging due to internet connectivity speed and access issues in some areas. And in addition, the jurisdictions very often will import, for lack of a better word, teachers from other countries, such as the Philippines, and recruit from organizations like the Peace Corps and World Teach. And of course, that means that there's this onboarding process where teachers need to not only acclimate to the school system, but also to the culture, and need to learn the curriculum and so forth. And so that's an issue of concern as well. So as you know, all 50 states and the District of Columbia, along with the 7 affiliated jurisdictions, have established teacher certification requirements. And these requirements do vary across the jurisdictions in the Pacific, but a majority of states on the mainland and Guam, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and American Samoa have all implemented testing programs and established minimum passing scores for teacher applicants on one or both of the Praxis exams, Praxis 1 or Praxis 2. So in American Samoa, for example, teachers are required to hold a bachelor's degree from an accredited college or university. They have to complete all of the required American Samoa teacher certification courses, and they have to pass the Praxis Core Academic Skills for Educators, commonly known as just the core tests, in reading, writing, and math. But again, I keep stressing this, the Pacific region is very geographically, culturally, and linguistically diverse, which can present some challenges, certainly, for teachers taking the Praxis or similar tests. And for a large percentage of teachers in the region, English is not their first language, so it can be challenging to take a certification test in English. And those teacher certification requirements, again, do vary. In the Federated States of Micronesia, for example, teachers are required to hold an associate degree and pass the National Standardized Test for Teachers, or NSTT, which is a locally developed test of teacher competencies. And while most teachers in the FSM do meet the education requirement to hold an associate degree, I think that number is 90% or upwards. The passing rates for the certification exam are a bit lower. They've hovered around the 50% mark for the past couple of years. So again, we're working with these partnerships in the region in the area of professional learning. And I want to stress that we're there for support and we're there as facilitators, but the partnerships set their own goals. They align those to their own strategic plans. And they're the ones doing the hard work to ensure that every child in the region is taught by a high-quality teacher. And that work, again, is contextualized. So as I mentioned before, what a high-quality teacher looks like in Palau might be a little different than what a high-quality teacher looks like in the FSM. So the partnerships are also developing local definitions of teacher effectiveness. And those then extend to ensuring that students are prepared for college and careers, which, as you saw on one of our earlier slides, is another of our priority areas. So all of those priority areas I mentioned earlier really build on one another. We do try to make those connections across the region as we're doing this work and as we're supporting this work. And of course, all teachers in any region need high-quality professional learning opportunities of their own. And it's really incumbent upon us as administrators and researchers and consultants to provide those for them and to support those in them so that they, in turn, can provide the highest quality of instruction to their students and to help them succeed. During part 2, we're going to talk about the characteristics of high-quality professional learning, and it is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Elise Gallagher. So again, Dr. Gallagher is the Associate Director of SRI International's Center for Education Policy, where she runs large-scale studies of teacher quality policies and programs, and she uses a range of methodologies for those. She does randomized trials, quasi-experimental designs, mixed methods, and she leads studies in particular on teacher preparation, professional development, and human capital management. She is currently leading studies of efforts to reform teacher preparation in the California State University system, which is the largest teacher preparation system in the world. And these studies address improving the integration of clinical experiences into teacher preparation, preparing teachers to teach in accordance with the next generation science standards and Common Core standards, and data-driven continuous improvement. Dr. Gallagher has also led studies of in-service teacher professional development, and those focused on supporting improvement of teaching practices and developing teacher leadership. They span all kinds of content areas: writing instruction, science instruction, mathematics instruction, and also instruction to support the development of academic language skills for English learners. In 2015, Dr. Gallagher was selected to serve on the technical review panel for the National Teacher and Principal Survey. You might know it as the Schools and Staffing Survey, as it was formerly called. And she's a national expert on teacher professional development, has provided technical assistance on using research to inform ongoing program improvement. And she was also a former teacher, teaching for several years in the Houston Independent School District and in the Phoenix Elementary School District. So by now, I'm sure you can see why we are so excited to have her with us today to talk about high-quality professional learning. Alix, thank you so much for joining us, and I am going to hand the presentation over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone on the line. Today it is my great pleasure to talk a bit and share some of the things I've learned from conducting research and reading the research of others and working alongside professional development providers as they work to help meet a wide variety of teacher needs for ongoing growth. So I'm going to start by just framing the question of what are the varied goals that people have for teacher professional learning, because teacher professional learning sometimes has a goal of building specific educator knowledge. Recently, as new standards have come in play, many different states and districts have decided that one very important role for professional development is to help teachers build their knowledge of those standards. But other times, professional development is targeting other goals, like supporting major changes in teacher instruction, or helping educators within a school or district community develop a shared vision and shared vocabulary and mutual goals around what it is that they should be teaching it or how best to teach material. And the different goals of professional development are sometimes really important to consider when figuring out the best ways to provide professional development for teachers. When we think about effective professional learning, we think really about three main characteristics of professional learning. And one is that it typically needs to be aligned with the content and pedagogy required by local, state, and national standards, frameworks, assessments, and goals. And this is really important because teachers actively make decisions about what to teach their students every day. And to the extent to which professional development is helping teachers reach the goals that they already have, it can be really effective in moving teachers forward. But when teachers get messages from professional development that are not aligned or at times might be somewhat contradictory to the goals that a broader school or district or state is setting for teacher instruction, then it is less likely that that professional development is going to make substantial progress in terms of changing teacher knowledge or helping all teachers in a community to build a shared vision. Another very important feature of effective professional development is that it supports teachers in sustained professional collaboration with colleagues. And we emphasize sustained because that is often a challenge for professional development for many reasons. Lots of workshops historically have been delivered in an afternoon or over a day at some point in time in the school year. But as we will discuss later on through this presentation, actually supporting teacher change can't happen at one point in time. Teachers need to be able to practice applying what they're learning and talk with other teachers if they're going to really make substantial changes in their practice. And finally, especially when the goal of professional development is to help teachers make changes in instruction, it's really important that the professional development offer teachers new models of teaching so they can see what desired practices would look like in a classroom like their own, then give teachers opportunities to practice applying those with their own students, and then the opportunity to reflect and sometimes get feedback on their implementation of new practices so that they can continue to refine their attempts at implementation over time. What I want to emphasize on this slide is that there is not a direct line from improving teacher knowledge to increasing student learning. In fact, that path goes through a change in teacher practice. And this is a really important idea that I want to take a minute to discuss more. And it's rooted in the fact that teaching is very complex to do. If you think about the experience of a teacher for a moment, a teacher has a certain amount of content that they know, and they need to make decisions and planning about how best to present that content and engage their students in that content. And then they actually go out into their classroom and they deliver that content to students, at which point in time they suddenly need to monitor how students are interacting with that content, what aspects of what they're trying to teach students are readily understanding and mastering, where students are struggling a bit more with the new ideas, and how best to address those. In addition to those kind of content-focused things, as we all know from our experiences as students and as teachers, teachers also need to do things to engage students in the lesson itself, sometimes to manage student behaviors if students are not engaged, and then also deal with kind of more complex questions about how to sequence any one lesson as part of a broader unit, and even further beyond that, an articulated path of instruction that students will have in given content over many years. And even taking a look at that description, which in some ways only scratches the surface, we see that there are a whole lot of thinking that goes into planning effective instruction, and then a vast amount of information synthesizing and decision making that happens in the moment in a classroom. And that complexity is core to understanding the challenges that face someone trying to design professional development in ways that it will change teacher instruction, but also helps us understand the things that we can build into our design of professional development to help it be effective at changing teacher practice. So as we talk about kind of what those features are, one of the first ideas that I mentioned a bit before is this idea that professional development needs to focus on the core content of what teachers will be teaching, and also provide a model for approaches that a teacher might use to teach it. And the models are very important because implicit in this notion that we're trying to help teachers change practice as well as just improve knowledge in order to improve student learning is the idea that the way teachers are teaching now or the way they are presenting content at this point in time is supposed to be changed through this professional development. And through models, you can show teachers kind of what the goal is and give teachers a very applied sense of what it would look like to be teaching in the ways that the professional development is trying to support them to teach. Luckily, there are lots of different approaches that any number of which can work in any context to giving teachers models for how to present professional development, for how to present instruction. And these include things like video clips of teachers teaching effectively, or written teaching cases that can point out specific things that teachers do instructionally. demonstration lessons where someone could come into a teacher's classroom and present those approaches with the teacher's own students, or at times doing a demonstration lesson where a teacher could come see someone else teaching. Unit and lesson plans play a key role as well because they can help teachers understand how to set up the content, various different strategies for presenting the content, materials to use in instruction to support students. And those types of the unit and lesson plans can, in that way, play a really key role in helping teachers transfer the ideas that they see in other models into their own teaching, especially if those instructional resources are tightly aligned with a particular approach to delivering content or a particular pedagogical approach. Peer observations can also be very helpful because it allows teachers to see their peers working together towards the same shared goals, and also can provide opportunities for feedback. And finally, use of things like curricular materials and even student work samples in professional development can help teachers understand where their students are and kind of reflect on the aspects of their instruction that are working, and let teachers see as they change their practice the difference that it makes for student work. A second very big idea in terms of thinking about effective professional development is the idea that teachers need to transfer what they are learning very actively into their classroom and figure out how to make a lot of decisions differently to actually make changes in the instruction they provide students. There are multiple approaches for helping teachers transfer from kind of new knowledge, which is something akin to this is what that practice looks like, to actually being able to apply it in their own classroom and do that new practice. And one is to help to give teachers an opportunity to experience content presented in a different way or a different set of instructional strategies with themselves as the role of a student. Getting to see what it's like to conduct an experiment as opposed to just reading about one in a book, for example, if one of the goals is to help teachers conduct more hands-on science activities, would be an example of this type of approach. Sometimes for complex teaching approaches, another thing that can help is letting teachers try that approach with small groups of students. And we sometimes see that actually in California with some of the teacher preparation programs we're working with, that they have partnered with districts that they are working with to provide, to let their student teachers provide some after-school tutoring to small groups of students, in the process giving their student teachers small group practice using strategies while the students benefit from the additional after-school tutoring. And that the same could be done as part of district-based professional development as well, so that teachers can work only with a small set of students, not have to deal with all of the classroom management and other demands of large groups of students, and get a chance to try out new skills or approaches in a slightly simpler situation than a full classroom. I mentioned before this point about aligned instructional materials, that, especially if there are new standards in play, it could be very important to revisit the instructional materials teachers have available to them and whether or not those materials present the content and provide support for teachers to present that content and work with students on that content in ways that match the new standards or school or district goals for instruction. And finally, all of those different approaches and more we lump together under this idea of transfer, and really recognizing that teachers need the time and space and a variety of supports as they do what is ultimately a very complicated task of taking knowledge about new ideas and figuring out how to apply that to the specific students they work with on a day-to-day basis, who are themselves unique individuals which means that it's not a rote task and it's not very easy. And so we have to understand that teachers need a variety of supports and a lot of opportunities to make that transfer successful if we're asking for a pretty big change in instruction. As part of this idea that we're asking teachers to make potentially large changes in instruction, we recognize that teachers are like all adult learners in that opportunities for reflection and feedback can be very key to helping us process changes we're trying to make, problem solve, and troubleshoot our early attempts at trying new things, and ultimately to refine and improve our practice over time. And teacher collaboration can be a real asset in that ongoing reflection and feedback, especially if that collaboration, at least from time to time, includes someone who is a more expert practitioner at the new practice who can give feedback and help teachers see any continuing gaps between teachers' current practice and the practices they're trying to adopt. That collaboration can take a lot of forms. It can be one-to-one conversations, between two individuals or a small group. And sometimes those conversations can happen virtually, if not in person. So people do not need to be in the same place to be able to support each other in implementation. A very important aspect of this type of collaboration can also be problem solving, because if teachers are really trying something new, anytime you try something new and complicated, it probably doesn't go best the first time. And having a partner who is somehow participating in the same work on, or the same new approaches to teaching to help bounce ideas off of and reflect and make sense of what's going on with early attempts of implementation can really support teachers in making changes. I also wouldn't want to minimize the potential real strength of bringing student work in to share with colleagues or professional development providers to talk about what it is that students are successfully taking up from new approaches at teaching, and also look for evidence of next steps, either in the teacher's practice of new pedagogical approaches or next steps in terms of the content to teach students based on an analysis of student work. And finally, we want to underline this idea of teachers learning together in communities, learning from each other, and working collectively towards a goal of having a very coherent, consistent instructional program for students, and just the power of teachers sharing their professional knowledge together and supporting each other's learning as a way to really sustain changes over time. Finally, one of the other things that I hinted at before is the idea of feedback. On their own, studies have shown that teachers sometimes overestimate the extent of changes in instruction. And I think one of the examples that comes up the most comes from an idea about mathematics teaching that suggests that students be given more open-ended mathematical questions and problems and encouraged to solve them in multiple correct ways and explain their answer. And there have been studies that have been shown that teachers initially exposed to those types of approaches might first pick up on the idea of having more word problems, and could think that if they increase the number of word problems in their mathematics instruction, they have successfully made the changes required, but might miss the fact that there are additional layers to the change being asked around the nature of the word problems and the way students are expected to answer them to provide evidence to support their thinking and explain their thinking to others. And Again, I think that speaks, that particular example speaks to the complexity, the fact that that particular change has multiple different facets, but also the importance of having the teachers work with someone who can support them in recognizing the changes they have already made and helping them see how to make the next steps of changes in their practice to fully realize the vision of instruction that the school or district is striving for. And one very common method for helping teachers do that is the use of instructional coaches who can provide job-embedded follow-up and continuous feedback, either one-on-one, facilitating small groups of teachers collaboratively, and sometimes also remotely using virtual coaching. And there are some pretty interesting technologies available that support teachers in videotaping their own practice to share that with coaches, or coaches being able to connect remotely, and some of the kind of more widespread video conferencing features that can really help people overcome distance as they work together in a coaching model. And to close, we wanted to kind of cycle back to two really big points that come up repeatedly in the research on professional development. And one is this idea that one-shot workshops really do not accomplish much unless the goal is to provide very basic information. A one-shot workshop can help teachers understand that there's a new some new piece of information, but is not going to help teachers make any substantial changes to the content they're teaching, the way they're sequencing it, or how they're presenting it, because teaching is so complex. And as a result, there's a substantial research base that supports the idea that professional development that is both of a relatively long duration and also spread out over time to allow for the ongoing feedback and reflection that we just discussed is really critical for making sure that professional development can support teachers to change their instruction in ways that help students' achievement improve. And then finally, just recognizing the very complicated work that teachers do, it's really important to give teachers time to learn, practice, apply, reflect on new strategies, and then go through that cycle again, recognizing that no substantial change is going to happen within the span of a couple weeks. Really, it is a longer-term process to help teachers integrate new ideas into the complex systems that are classrooms. And I think that concludes the kind of prepared comments I have. Kristen, I don't know if you'd like to open the floor to questions, or if there were any questions that were submitted before where we should start.
Yes, thank you, Alix, for that great presentation. And we would like to open up the chat box to questions. It looks like we do have some people typing now, so we'll give that a couple of minutes. But we did have some questions that were pre-submitted during the webinar registration process. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into those in the meantime. And some of them I think are really kind of big ideas, so we might want to break them into more than one question, or we might want to continue the conversation via email or offline, or through some other literature searches. I do want to let everybody know that we have an Ask a REL service through the Institute of Education Sciences, and you can ask any of your education research questions through that, and we can pull together literature for you. I'm going to go ahead and push that link out in the chat box if you'd like to look into that service. So any questions that we aren't able to get to today, or that come up afterwards, you could certainly send a request through that Ask a REL service. If you're outside of the Pacific region, that would go to your local regional educational laboratory for review. If you're in the Pacific region, that comes to us, and we would pull together that information for you. But let's jump in. to the questions that were already submitted. So the first one was, in what ways should districts design tiered professional learning tied to instructional framework, and what data systems exist to track, monitor, and provide ROI? I think those are maybe two or possibly even three questions kind of rolled into one there. So Alix, I don't know if you want to jump into that while we wait for more questions to come through.
Sure, I can try to first kind of break apart the questions. Since I'm not looking at them, I think one was about how to provide tiered professional development. I know there was another about monitoring the effects of professional development in there.
Right.
Did I capture all of it?
Yes, I think so. I'm going to go ahead and type that into the chat box also,
okay.
so you can see
Great.
that,
Thank you.
you've got the gist of it for sure. But,
okay. So dealing with, I'll take the question about tiered professional development and broaden it a bit to kind of recognize that goals that districts and communities have for teachers may vary, and teachers themselves may come in with different pre-existing knowledge, skills, and approaches. And I think I would say that the way to plan professional development is probably similar to a lot of strategic planning, where it's important to articulate upfront the goals that are desired outcomes of the professional development, and then map back from there how to achieve them. And it might be that if you can identify what tiers there are up front, the mapping and the planning process would lead you to provide different professional learning opportunities for different groups of teachers. And I think connected to that, I see a question in the chat about how culture factors into professional development. And I could see kind of a couple different possible interpretations of that question. One is about the culture of the teachers themselves, and another question might be about the cultures of students. And I think that that would be one of the very important things you would want to consider in designing the professional development, is how best to work with your teachers and who they are, and then in terms of the goals for students and student instruction, what type of classroom environment is going to be most conducive for helping all students achieve their best. And so all of the various ways that you can think about really the humans emotionally as well as intellectually who are involved in learning, in professional learning opportunities, and then the opportunities that educators then provide for their students learning. Culture is one of the many factors that you might want to consider as part of a process for planning your professional development. There was another question, another part of that initial question that dealt with this question of monitoring professional development. And one of the ways we would recommend thinking about that are kind of first taking a look at after you have a plan, and I'm going to assume that for the sake of discussion, you've come up with a plan where teachers spend a day in professional development at the start of the school year, then have follow-up sessions with a coach one day a month over the course of the school year. And one of the things you might want to find out about is implementation and making sure that teachers are choosing to attend each of the events, that the coach is actually finding ways to connect with teachers, if there are particular curricular resources that teachers are supposed to be able to draw on as they implement the things learned in professional development in their classroom, making sure that that part of the implementation of the program happens. And so that's definitely one of the things that you'd want to do in monitoring. But you would also want to monitor in an ongoing way for whether or not the professional development is achieving its goals in terms of the changes in instruction that students are receiving. And so, there are a variety of different ways that people could do that. One way might be observing in teachers' classrooms, an easier but less accurate way would be asking teachers about whether they believe they are successfully implementing. And when I say it's less accurate, it is a less accurate way to find out if teachers have made the changes in instruction. But there is another thing you can do in terms of asking teachers about professional development that is really important, which is to learn a bit about their experiences trying to implement the new approaches into their classroom, learning about which things are challenging for them. Sometimes people find out about places where teachers are not seeing the alignment across between the new approaches or new resources and school goals. Sometimes you learn about things as basic and critical as difficulty if there's any particular technology that's supposed to be in play supporting the professional learning, like if you had a virtual coaching, but people have trouble actually accessing that. Those would be very important things that you could learn from finding out about teachers' experience with the program. And I don't think those should be, the importance of those should be downplayed, but it is important to recognize that those are probably not the best ways to know whether or not teacher instruction has really changed. So being able to find out either by directly observing teachers or through data from their students about the effects of professional development on the ultimate goals of improving instruction and student learning seem like really important parts of a comprehensive monitoring practice. And to that end, in this question about data systems, the way that you would probably want to track whether or not programs are meeting their goals would be somewhat unique to each program. And so there could be databases or even more simply data files that you use to collect the data, but there are not any generally available existing data sets or systems that probably provide sufficiently detailed information that would help you track whether or not your professional development is being implemented as designed or having the effects that were hoped for.
Thank you for that, Alix. I'd like to just circle back, if I may, to the question of culture and how that factors into professional development, and just talk a little bit about the work that REL Pacific is doing around these partnerships for improving teaching. And as I mentioned before, we do have this underlying focus on incorporating the Pacific culture and issues in Pacific education into the work that we're doing and the support that we're providing out in the region. And so when our partnerships were initially launched this year, and the Palau work was continued from the last contract cycle, we really sat down together to talk about what does effective teaching, what does high quality teaching look like in your context? And I think that's critical to this conversation, is to bring in a variety of stakeholders. So rather than simply having trainers or higher level administration, that higher level staff kind of deciding what professional learning should look like and deciding what high quality and what effective teaching looks like in specific contexts. We really do try to get all of the voices at the table for that. And so, in Hawaii, for example, I could imagine that conversation might include some conversation around the HA outcomes, which for those of you who are not familiar with that, that's a Hawaii State Department of Education-wide framework that focuses on developing skills and behaviors and dispositions that honor the qualities and the values of the culture of Hawaii and the indigenous language. So I think, that's really kind of how we're coming at it. And we do typically try to make a distinction between professional learning and professional development. In that professional learning is really a more active kind of a thing that's happening. The teachers are learning, the teachers are engaged, the teachers have buy-in, the teachers are involved, as opposed to development, which sometimes can feel a little bit like something that's done to us. We develop another person rather than, we're these people learning together in this collaborative kind of environment. So I just wanted to jump in and and provide that context. And we're certainly happy to give you more information offline if you'd like around, the continuing work in Palau and the FSM and around sort of our approach to that. So we have a couple of other questions now that I think we can jump into. And again, please feel free, anybody who has a question or a comment that you'd like to share in the chat box, please feel free to go ahead and type that in. There was a question from a registrant who worked on professional development in American Samoa in the past and was wondering about the use of teleconferencing. And I know you did, Alix, talk a little bit about remote and virtual professional learning to cut down on traveling costs. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to sort of the advantages and potentially some of the challenges of that.
Oh gosh, I think one of the things that would be most important to think about are that kind of any approach has both kind of strengths and affordances and then also challenges that come with it. One of the first things I think about when I think about really remote education is some work I did up in rural communities in Alaska for a different study where the only way that teachers within a district could connect was, via technology, because the schools were hours apart, flights apart from each other in very rural communities that did not have good access. And in those cases, technology was the only way that teachers outside of a particular school, and a school typically had 2 teachers in it for the entire K-12 school, the only way that people could collaborate outside of with the other teacher at their school. And so technology was critical, but also we know that sometimes technology fails. And that's, I assume, at least as challenging in the Pacific region as it is elsewhere. And so, I think being open to a lot of approaches is really important, but trying to think sometimes about a balance and ways to leverage in-person communities when possible and use online or other technology resources as well. And there are some pretty useful affordances of some technologies. For example, thinking about this idea of going to watch a demonstration lesson that a teacher is doing. You can watch it live, and that can be very informative, but if there's a video, it can actually work really nicely to start watching a video, pause it, have a group of teachers discuss, maybe go back and rewatch. And, the person, if there's a coach or other person leading that group of teachers in professional, I'll say professional development, but the idea is very much a learning experience, not something being done to teachers. The video offers ways to pause and invite engagement and analysis from teachers and really help it shift from a watching an expert teach their class to a being able to discuss together what it is that a teacher is doing in ways that can help teachers bring different and new ideas about instruction to their class. So video can be really helpful in that way. Teachers also can try out resources. And, teachers' lives, like everyone's, are busy. They, have families and other commitments in their community outside. And the ability to share things asynchronously is sometimes really important. So professional learning communities that exist largely online, maybe solely online, can be very vibrant and don't always have the time demands that saying, okay, everyone, we need to meet after school at 3:30 to discuss this thing can have. And so that's another real affordance that technology can give to professional learning communities of teachers as they work together to try out new ideas and new approaches in their classroom. And so, I think those are two of the things that I think of off the top of my head is just on the one hand, ways to open up new avenues for teachers to collaborate and share together and learn together, and this other idea of kind of ways that technology can be used to help teachers share artifacts and be able of instruction, be those videos of teaching or examples of student work, and be able to collectively interact, analyze, interact around, and come to understandings of what they're seeing and the implications for their own teaching. Technology can be great facilitators of those things. So I would just say that, I don't think that either online, virtual, that set, or in person are always the best, but it can be really good to think about the strengths of whatever approaches and try to understand what the teachers you're working with need the most, and which approaches are feasible that can best help support those teachers' growth.
Thank you, Alix. And that, that really does line up to the way that we approach it in the Pacific, also under the REL Pacific contract. And this webinar is a really good example. So as you all know, we are recording this, and we will take this out into the region, into places where, perhaps there's internet connectivity makes it a little more difficult to join a webinar, or where a number of our colleagues perhaps had conflicts because it's the school day right now, for example, in Kosharai, or because it's the middle of the night somewhere else, and so we do take kind of a hybrid approach also, where this webinar will come with us out into the region when we're out meeting with our partnerships, and we'll share that, and during facilitated conversations, and we'll also distribute it a little bit more widely than that. So that does really align nicely to kind of how we approach it also, because we have so many of those same challenges with intermittent kind of connectivity and traveling great distances. As I mentioned before, our region is quite geographically vast, and so in fact a number of my colleagues are currently kind of hopscotching around the region doing some improvement science work, and it's to sort of leverage that work. It's a 2-week-long trip, which is not always possible to do that. So thank you for that. And if there aren't any other questions, I think we're going to give you some found time today, which I know is always welcome this close to the holidays. I'm sure we're all scrambling to kind of get all of our work done and hopefully take some time off. I did want to move into these next slides. We have some references for you. Please don't feel like you have to write these down or capture these in any way right now. I will send out a PDF of the PowerPoint either a little bit later today or first thing tomorrow, so you'll have those resources. There's quite a number of them, as you can see. So if you have any questions around those, please do feel free to reach out to us, or any questions about anything, really, something that you heard today, something that you think of later. And you all have my email, so I can go ahead and connect you with Alix. Again, we are so thrilled that Alix joined us today for this presentation. There's our contact information there. Looks like we do have a couple of more people typing, so I'm going to just pause here for just a second to see if any more questions come